with today I'm going to be talking story with you a little bit about safety planning. So let me go ahead and share my slide. Oops, sorry. Okay. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can see the screen.
All right, perfect. So I am not able to see all of you when I'm presenting. Um, yeah, like I said, this is so quick. So if you guys have questions, just put it in the chat. I always get back to it. Whether it be email or if you give me a call. I love when people call me to talk story about some of the things that I share. So yeah, just you don't have to wait to put it till the end. Just leave it in the chat, and then I will get back to it as soon as I can. So, anyways, today we're talking about safety planning. This is, I think, number 6, if I'm not mistaken, of our pick DV Lunch and Learn series. So if you were here from the very first one when I talked about the theories and foundations of domestic violence. Thank you for sticking with us. I think this is the very last one. But even after this, now that you guys know me, I invite you to call me, talk story, reach out to me by email, whatever it is, so we can, discuss anything else. And I love sharing information about the work that we do at DVAC. Anyways, okay, I'm going to jump right in. And let's see, hold on. I always have tech issues because I am like a, pen and paper person, so bear with me. Alrighty, so some of the things that we might talk about today, even though this is basic information, it might be triggering to some people. So take care of yourself. If you need one-on-one time afterwards, just reach out to me. I'm more than happy to again talk story with you guys some more. Um, this is a book that I don't like to read a lot of books, but if you're interested in advocacy or wanting to know more about the work, this is one of the best books that I've read. I've been doing this work for about since 2012. And one of the favorite things that I got from this book is that Jill Davies, one of the authors, she says, I'm an elaborator on the obvious. So, with my time with you today, some of the things that I share with you for this safety planning kind of presentation, some of it might seem very obvious, like, duh, Ella, why are you telling me this? But I want you to keep in mind that with domestic violence survivors, when they or anybody who's experiencing some kind of crisis, our minds don't operate the same as if we're calm and we're well, right? So I want you to keep that in mind. And I encourage you, if you want to learn more about domestic violence advocacy, this is a great book for anyone to have on hand. Oops. All right. So a safety plan, a lot of I train all the advocates in our agency, and when they start learning about safety plans and they come back and they have this like 5-page, plan, right? And it's great. I mean, they think through it, they think of every little detail. And then I say to them, no, you have to work on that some more, because a safety plan should always be personalized and practical, right? Remember what I just said. When someone's in crisis, our minds don't operate the same. They're not going to remember every little detail. They're going to have to remember that in this moment, okay, this is what will help lessen the likelihood of me being harmed, right? So a safety plan is a personalized, practical plan that can help one avoid dangerous situations and know the best way to react when they are in danger. So this plan includes ways to remain safe while in a relationship, planning to leave, or after a victim has left. And I'll share with you why a little later, why when someone is trying to leave, it is the most dangerous time. So we like to look at developing a safety plan like a fire drill, right? Do you guys remember in like elementary school, they used to have this practice like the stop, drop, and roll. And so when we are creating safety plans, we're looking at what safety concerns the survivor has. right? And from that, we try to develop a plan that will help keep them safe or lessen again the likelihood of them experiencing serious harm. So that's what I love this kind of analogy of a safety plan being like a fire drill. So we can look at it, okay, if harm is unavoidable in the home, what can we do then? What can we do to lessen the likelihood of you being harmed? So a safety plan should address basic needs, the immediate and long-term safety, minimize risk and increase protection, and provide education and information and identify support systems and how to access them. Now, if you remember or you were with us from the first one, I share how um, for many survivors of domestic violence, they're often estranged or disconnected from support systems, right? Because many people may not understand a survivor's reasons for staying or not calling the police. And so often we find survivors have difficulties, um, uh, asking for or receiving support. And especially, I mean, it's associated with shame and with guilt. And so often survivors, they have challenges when they're wanting to figure out how to get safe and stay safe. And then a safety plan should also enhance well-being. I think that so often, many people are worried about, the physical safety, that sometimes the mental health or mental health safety planning is often kind of not looked at as, equally important. So we'll talk a little bit about that more in the presentation. And so I'm going to share with you some guiding principles and core concepts that we use when we're trying to work with survivors to develop safety plans. And so these are the guiding principles and core concepts. So safety planning is central to our work. Safety planning isn't just about safety. It's also about expanding options to be safer and expand well-being. I'll explain to you guys what that means a little bit later. And it's a process, not a product. And so just because a survivor might come to you today and say, this is my safety concerns, this is what's happening, that could definitely change an hour later, a day later, a week later. And so, it's not a one size fits all, one and done. Whenever I go out and train, like medical professionals or other business anybody, any community member, I always say that we should be safety planning every time, all the time, because things change so quickly. And what something that we may offer or suggest to help keep someone safe, that might change. And so we want to make sure that we're always assessing the situation, what works best for them, and remembering that they are the experts of their own life, and so what we think that would work for us may not work for someone else, right? And it works best as a partnership. So I guess that's what I was kind of getting into. Okay, safety planning is central to our work. So the general framework approach to advocacy is the same framework that applies to safety planning. So when we're thinking about people who have experienced trauma, we want to meet them where they're at, right? We want to listen without judgment. We want to take into consideration someone's maybe culture. Um, or background, their upbringing, because, like I've said in the first one, we live in a melting pot of different cultures and ethnicities. And in some cultures, they may not even have a word for domestic violence, right? Or abuse. And so we want to make sure that if ever someone came to us seeking help or support, that we're taking in those considerations, because again, something that we suggest may not work for them, or they might not have clarity or understanding about, what we're kind of guiding them or advising them to do. So, we want to always remember that and take that into consideration. And so here's the kind of the mindset that I teach advocates, right? We want to listen. I believe that so many times we listen just to reply. And especially when like we've been doing like our jobs like for a long time, and like for us, all we do right here every single day, we hear about people's struggles, their fears, And I mean, it's one after another. We have currently 269 active advocacy cases. And, to some people that may not seem like a lot, but those are almost 300 families who's reached out for help and needing support and advocacy, right? And so for some people, we have so many different things, right, affecting our day and our work, and sometimes we don't just sit down to listen, what someone is asking us or needing, because also sometimes they don't just come right out and say it. If domestic violence is associated with shame, with guilt, with fear, often people struggle to say that, look, this is what I'm going through, this is what I've experienced. And so, we really, really want to make sure that we are listening. I think that that's such a skill. And especially like for me, like I'm a certified yapper. So sometimes it's like I have to remind myself, okay, I'm speaking with someone. I need to take in what they're saying so that way I can draw on my experience or the resources that we have to be able to really help. And so listen, think about what they're saying and about some of the considerations I just kind of mentioned. Okay, does this, affect, were the culture affected? Do they have, a lot of kids where, maybe going to a shelter is not the right, is not safe for them either. So we want to take a minute to just let whatever we're listening or they're saying to us sink in, so we can think about, what kind of help or support that we're going to offer, and then we advocate. And if when I first started this work years ago. And I think that so many of us that get into this line of work or in the helping profession, we all have bleeding hearts, right? And so I think that it's our default setting to care and to want to help and to want to maybe feel like we need to fix it, because even till this day, um, it bothers me when I know that someone is experiencing harm or they're scared, and I want to do everything I can to make it better, right? And often that's not what they need or want in that moment. So for so many survivors who come to us, they don't even want to leave their relationship. They just want the violence to stop. And and so sometimes that can be hard for advocates or other professionals who are working with survivors to accept, right? That, well, how come you don't just leave? Because so there, the stigma and the myths and misconceptions surrounding this unique type of abuse, it sometimes can get in the way of how we are offering help or and so anyways, that's just something to think about. I was talking about listening being a skill. I really, really, truly think that it's something that we need to practice. And again, this is one of those. Okay, duh, Ella, we know this, but I think it's worth mentioning, right? That the things that we should and should not do. And so, again, if you're thinking about someone who is coming to you, who's experiencing this type of harm, we want to show interest and be understanding. I think that it is a privilege to know someone's story. And so I really, really take my job seriously. And I care about, people feeling safe and comfortable. And so I feel like everyone in the helping profession, I think that, we sometimes need to be reminded. About that. But, we want to encourage victims to or survivors to make his or her own choices and decisions. If we understand that domestic violence, intimate partner violence is about a power imbalance and rooted in power and control, right? That one person has power and control over the other, then we want to be able, when working with a survivor, to help them understand that or make their own choices, right? Because again, it's not about us. Um, offer options. I think that's one of the best things. You don't have to just be employed at DVAC to be an advocate. All of you are advocates. And I think that one of the best tools that we can have as advocates is understanding and knowing resources. And so, we are so lucky to, have partnerships and connections with, organizations like Partners in Care, Pohana o Nawahine, Child and Family Services. So many. I could just be here till next week naming, all the organizations and people that help us, be able to provide safety, peace, and healing to people who come to us needing help. And another important thing, when listening is that we want to start from a place of believing, right? And I think that one thing I had to learn is I'm very expressive. And sometimes, you know how they say, like, oh gosh, her face has subtitles. And mine's did. And sometimes I still do. And I have to be very conscious and even not maybe I'm believing the person, but my facial expression or my body language or some gesture I make, it has very early on in my career, um, it has made people feel like, wait, you don't believe me, or I know that sounds crazy, and then they shut down, right? And that's the last thing that any of us would ever want, right? So I say start from a place of believing, be mindful of how we're emoting or how we're sharing information or advice, because I take it like I really believe this is the when someone comes to you, that might be the one and only time they ever reach out for help. And I mean, when I think about something that I've done that maybe made someone say, you know what, see, nobody's going to believe me. The way Ella looked at me or her tone, the way she responded to me, now I'm not going to reach out for help. That, I mean, I can't, I couldn't live with that. And so, I'm very, very conscious and I remind people like when we're working with people who've experienced trauma, we want to be mindful about how we're offering help or information. And of course these are the things we should not do. We should not judge. Um, we shouldn't offer our own opinions or give any kind of, well, if you're not an attorney or working in the capacity of an attorney, then we can't give legal advice. One of the main things that people come call DVAC for is for help navigating the legal systems, systems like the family court, criminal court, or even the child welfare system. Sometimes it can be very difficult for, survivors to understand or navigate. And so we want to be very careful about how, we're providing information, because something that we say or do could impact what they do or say, and it could have, some negative consequences if it was interpreted in a way that wasn't intended. When someone is sharing their story, we just want them to we don't want to interrupt. I mean, it's very rare where you have a client or we have a client that comes in or a survivor that comes in and then she just voila out, like she just says, okay, this is what's happening to me, this is what happened, he did this to me, or he or she did this to me, this is what's going on in my life, blah blah blah. Normally, or usually we are having to ask questions, right, to figure out or to assess the risks, to assess the safety, to figure out how we're going to offer supports or resources, because it's very rare that they'll come in just telling you everything. And so, when they are speaking, you want to make sure not to interrupt or jump to conclusions. Um, and then we should not question the victim's actions or responses or overreact. I think I was just gave you some examples about my own behavior when I first started. And so a survivor defined approach begins with understanding each survivor's perspective. We hear that a lot, right? Like trauma informed care, being trauma informed. I think that in our lines of work, I think so many of us are well versed in what it means to be trauma informed. And so we want to remember that, again, a survivor is an expert of their own lives. And so in order to make a safety plan or to even start developing a safety plan, we want to understand where they're coming from and work with that. And so We want to learn about their risk analysis and life circumstances, along with their priorities, past and current safety plans, and relationship decisions. And so, if someone, comes to you and they said, and you're suggesting something, and they said, well, I tried that before and it doesn't work. Okay. Take that with you, because then when you're developing another safety plan, then you'll know, well, that didn't work for her, and we don't want to push any of that. And then sometimes you might think, I might have shared this in one of the other um, lunch and learns, that I was working with this research company, right? And we were studying Japanese survivors of domestic violence, and what we found. So we studied them for 4 years, and a lot of them, were experiencing harm, like physical harm, but their priority for safety was all surrounding like finances. And these were, I'm not speaking for all people who are Japanese, but the clients that we studied, um, so we were thinking, oh my gosh, like they're experiencing physical violence, and some of them were being injured. But in their minds, they were like, if I do not have money to be able to provide basic needs for my children, I am not safe. So they interpreted their safety, or they prioritized their finances with safety, right? And so if I, as an advocate, was like, no, okay, yeah, we can deal with that later, we'll get you some housing or whatever, let's get a TRO or whatever, they probably wouldn't respond to me, because in their minds, their priority is that I need to be sure that I can pay for a roof over my head or my children's heads, and I can provide their basic needs. And so we want to remember that that what we think might be good, or the priority for someone, may not be theirs. um, we want to build a partnership, review risks, and identify options relevant to their priorities, decisions, and the dangers that they face. And we want to implement a strengthened, comprehensive safety plan. Okay, so if the fundamental harm of abuse is that someone doesn't get to be in charge of their own life, remember what I said, that domestic violence is rooted in power and control, right? There's an imbalance of power. There's one person who exerts power and control over the other. So if the fundamental harm of abuse is that someone doesn't get to be in charge of their own life, then the remedy or repair of that harm is helping someone be back in charge of their own life. And we try to do that with, with empowerment, autonomy, and self-determination. I want to tell you guys that this doesn't happen like that, right? Like, okay, now this person comes into reaches out to you for help, and then we help them with the safety plan. We gave them some resources, and it's all good now. It takes time, and so when you're working with survivors, we have to be patient, because sometimes, they it takes a long time for them to feel like, oh wow, I can do this on my own. Or a lot of survivors we work with, they often want us to tell them what to do. And this is not, I don't want to say what they're used to, but this was like a survival tactic, right? That's what I'll say. When they're comply, or when they do what they're told, maybe sometimes they'll even display behaviors that seem manipulative, or like questionable. And sometimes survivors will use these types of behaviors to survive in their own relationships. And then when they do reach out for help, and they're working with, with other people, sometimes those behaviors carry over to like a working relationship, maybe with their advocate. And so it takes time for some, like we can't tell someone, okay, I gave you, you have all of these things. You have a safety plan, you have resources. Okay, I empower you. Like it doesn't work that way, right? Like no one can tell you when you're empowered. So, we want to make sure that that when we are the sources for support, that we're really listening to, what works for them, and understand that, sometimes it may take a bunch of times before, something works, but our jobs as advocates, we really want to try to help get them there, so that they feel empowered, that they have autonomy, and they're self-determined. Okay, so safety planning isn't just about safety, it's also about expanding options to be safer, and expand well-being. So, sometimes some people they struggle about this concept, right? They're like, okay, either you safe or you're not. But remember what I said, how many survivors, they don't want to leave their relationship. They just want the abuse to stop. And so that's kind of, we'll talk about the differences or what I mean by that. So by definition, safety requires more than the absence of physical violence. A victim who is no longer hit by a partner but has no way to feed her children or pay the rent is not safe. Nor is she safe if she still experiences debilitating effects of trauma or lives in social isolation. So victims are safe when there is no violence, their basic human needs are met, and they experience social and emotional well-being. So when I'm talking about safe versus safer, that's what I mean. If someone is, um, has no violence, their basic needs are being met, and their social and emotional well-being is great, then we're like, okay, that person's safe. And I should have said this from the beginning. I know that my examples, um, they mentioned she as the victim. I no way mean to, if I offend anyone with that, that is not my intention. Um, Anyone can be a victim of domestic violence. And so whenever I'm doing presentations or I'm giving examples, I draw off of my own experience. And in all the years that I've been working as an advocate, the majority of the people that I've worked with have been female. And so, I try not to use gendered language as much as possible, but in some of my, uh, presentations, I may use she as the victim. But if that offends anyone, I apologize. That's not my intention. Okay, moving on. So, safety, again, safety and safer, right? So, safety is no violence, basic human needs are met, and they have social and emotional well-being. We're safer, and this is all in that book that the first slide that I showed you. They talk about these concepts, and so safer is less violence, um, economic stability, and then increased well-being strengthened. So that's, a lot of times when we are safety planning, and there's violence in the home, and I'll give you an example. We had a client whose partner, was struggling with substance use, right? And the client noticed that when the partner was high, that she experienced less violence, or the harm wasn't as bad. And so, and this, of course, may be like, what is that, a safety plan? But so we thought, okay, well, I mean, of course, we would never. I also oversee the Safe, Strong, and Sober program, but in her situation, right? We said, okay, well, if this person is getting high, then um, not to I want to be careful how I say this. She left $10 or money. She left money on the TV, so that way her partner had money um to be able to get high. So that way she didn't experience violence and she didn't want to leave. And of course, right? Some people would judge that and say like, "What? Like, why would you even?" But that was her way of being safer. And so sometimes, right, and again, there's no judgment, and we're looking at, okay, how do we reduce the harm? And that was one of the ways that she, kept herself safer. So safer. So it's flexibility versus perfection. Sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, it has to be perfect. They can't do, they have to have all these little things in order to be safe. And so I want you to remember that when you're working with a client or a survivor, it takes time. I talked about, I mentioned about being patient. It's small steps. So we can't expect that if we give someone safety tips or we create a safety plan with someone that, oh, they're just going to be able to do it and then boom, they're safe. Often we're checking in with our clients as much as we can or as much as they're able to practice to go over these safety tips or safety plans, right? And to do little things at a time. Because if someone is being controlled, right, the likelihood of their abuser seeing something different is very high. And then we could put them in more danger, right? And so, we help them, we help them find ways to practice their safety plan, especially if they're wanting to flee. That is one of the most dangerous times for a survivor to leave. Is I'm sorry, excuse me. When they're wanting to leave, if you're thinking about domestic violence being about power and control, right, and someone having control over another, if they understand or know that they're losing control, that's that's when the likelihood of violence increases 75%. And then we find things like bad, like physical harm, or even worse, it could be fatal. And so, we want to always make sure that we're thinking about that. So, a safety plan builds on the strengths of what the survivor has already done, is truly survivor centered and survivor defined, helps us learn about what motivates decision making, and then leads to understanding. Um, I get asked a lot about the kids, right? What about the kids? What if they're home? If you're working with a survivor and you have these safety tips, those same safety plan may have to be changed for the kids, right? So even with children, the day-to-day advocacy goal is not perfection, it's safety, but it's improvement. So we want to think about their basic human needs, also emotional and social well-being and freedom from violence. There's so many things that you have to consider. I'll talk about that in a minute. But like for example, with kids, often we have to talk about with our clients about teaching the children, like not take, especially little older children, about not getting in the middle or trying to stop it, about code words. And again, this is such a short hour that if any of you are working with a family or wanted to talk more about developing a safety plan for kids, please reach out to me. We have templates, we have guiding questions, and all of that for you to consider. Safety planning for kids. I mean, we do this. This is much longer training, and so but these are the things that you want to consider when thinking about the kids, right? Developing code words. I'll give you some safety tips in a little bit, but it is different. I mean, we've had, children who have been harmed trying to stop or get in the way when violence is happening in the home. And even, we've had kids share, like they come up with a code word. So one of the things that, we'll tell clients is, have a code word for your kids, because so often they don't want to call, the survivor doesn't want the police to be called, right? And so, one of the safety, tips that we may share with clients is that, what, if the violence is bad and you need to call, or you want to call 911, maybe come up with a code word for your kids so that way they know. But then they don't tell the kids, don't share the code word, right? And then the abuser finds out the code word, and then it's just not good for the survivor. And so those are all kind of things that we want to think about, when we're developing safety plans. And so here's some safety tips with kids um, in the house. So you want to maybe identify or a room they can go to when they're afraid, and something they can think about when they're scared. Instruct them to stay out of the kitchen, bathroom, and other areas where there are items that could be used as weapons. So thinking kitchen, garage. We have all of us. We have so many things, right, that could be used to seriously harm someone. And so we want to teach them to stay out of areas like that if something's happening. Teach them that they should never intervene. and help them make a list of people that they're comfortable talking with and expressing themselves to. I should make sure that I clarify this when I say make a list. That may not be writing it down, right? Because if again, if that's found, that could put them in harm's way. Um, and so, we have some clients, maybe they live in apartment buildings and they've identified, like, okay, Auntie Ella over there, she's good with the kids. My partner knows that, she's good with the kids. And now I'm telling them, hey, if I say this, run to Auntie Ella, and call the police or get help or whatever it is, right? So, here's more tips that you can consider if you're ever having to safety plan for children is teach children when and how to call 911. We have had so many people tell us that they were telling their kids 911, 911 or this, and then when it's time and they're like, okay, call the police, call the police. The kid didn't know because they can't find 11 on the phone, right? And that, I mean, it's real, it happens. And so we want to make sure that if we're ever having to use this or share this tip with someone, that we are reminding them to teach children when and how to call 911. To create a code word to indicate when they need to leave the home or call 911 in case of an emergency, and make sure that they know not to tell others. So I just kind of explained some of that. Instruct them to leave the home if possible when things begin to escalate, and identify safe places they can go. And think of an explanation in case children tell the abusive partner, or if the abusive partner finds out. And so that's always with safety plans is one of the things we're like, okay, what if this, he finds out? What is our thing? Let's practice it. That way, they're able to speak back to it if ever they're like caught. Okay, so here's some things that make children safer, is violence prevention and reduction. All it takes, research shows that it just takes one loving, caring, supportive adult to buffer the effects of domestic violence. And that one person could be you, right? It could be, a teacher, a coach, counselor, someone, auntie, uncle, whatever it is that we can help to buffer the effects of DV or child abuse. And so here, these are the things that when we're looking as maybe service providers, advocates, whoever we are, these are some of the areas that you want to maybe try to think about in terms of their safety. Okay, is having an option to leave is having no option to leave, making a decision to stay. I'm going to say it again and let that sink in, okay? Is having no option to leave, making a decision to stay. So leaving may be a strategy, but it's not the only strategy. And again, I think I've said it like 50 million times already, that, some people don't want to leave. Um, and for some people, they cannot leave. We have a program at DVAC. It's our Pulama'ika Ohana program, and that program focuses on the needs of children. And often it's not uncommon for cases to come in with 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 children. And, if you think about it, about why someone would, keep having that many children, they're more vulnerable, right? I mean, you, it's so much easier to control someone when you have these children. And I want to say this too. It's not even having to do, about safety planning, but I like to point this out that when someone is experiencing domestic violence and they have children, and maybe they're coming to you, right? And again, it goes back to the no judging, let's listen. I want us to remember that their ability to parent effectively is often removed because of the power and control, right? And when you think about someone having children, it could be one child, 12 children, whatever it is, and this person is controlled, everything. Maybe they're not working, they're financially dependent, right? The abuser is the breadwinner. They don't have access to money to provide their own basic needs because that needs to come from the abuser. and then they don't have any, they're isolated from supports, they're isolated, from family. They don't even know that DVAC exists and has resources to help, right? And so they feel like I just have to survive. And that's what we hear from a lot of people, unfortunately. It's so heartbreaking. Like I said, as long as I've been doing this work, I think that I still have days where I'm reading a referral or an advocate comes for guidance or support, and I am brought to tears, or I'm like brought to like anger, because I'm just like, oh my gosh. And when I think about people who are not able to leave, right? And then I hear like some of my own family, they still subscribe to these things, like oh, how come, must not be that bad. She never leave, or must not be that bad. They never called a police. And it's like, oh my gosh. I think that, I mean, there's so much work to be done educating people and spreading awareness about stuff like this, because there are people who are suffering in silence, right? And so we want to make sure that we're aware of this. Is that people, they don't want to experience that, but sometimes they feel like they have no choice. It's not a process, not a product. So again, that's just understanding that, let's safety plan every time, all the time. Let's say, hey, you know what, how's it going now? What is your current safety concern? That's kind of what I ask, when I'm speaking with survivors, and they have, maybe they're sharing all these different incidents, and there's so many other stressors in their lives, and I ask, what is your current safety concern, so that way I can focus time on figuring out what questions to ask, some of the things that I might suggest. And so we want to take into account the victim's priorities. So the risks, if we're suggesting, like hide a go bag. Okay, well, do they live in a very, you know, um, small place where maybe there's less hiding spots? What is does the abuser have cameras all over the place? Then if they do, we're not going to say hide a go bag, right? If they're very observant, or they know every little thing, where it goes, and if something's out of place, that's probably not something I would suggest to someone, if they're in, if that's their situation, right? You want to also think about, advocate resources, information, analyzing, the risks, um, and resources, and then how we help. And so, and then that together, that can start to create a safety plan. So a safety planning flow, you of course want to initiate the conversation, identify relevant options and resources, respectfully review the risks. Sometimes, there's been clients where we've had to tell them, I am scared, I'm concerned for your safety. I'm concerned that, especially when there's strangulation, I think I mentioned it in the part one of this series, is that strangulation is, they call it the last warning shot. And if you think about why they call it that, I mean, it's so personal, and it's so, where someone has control over whether you're going to breathe or not, or whether I'm going to take your life or not. And um and the terror that it causes um for survivors, for people who are experiencing that type of abuse. And so often when I'm seeing strangulation, or even when they disclose that their partner often talks about suicide, or they have suicidal ideations. And so someone's first thought might be like, well, they're not threatening to kill her, they're threatening to harm themselves, right? That is such a mis for some for I'm not saying that this is like a one size fits all, but for many of the cases that we review or we analyze, and we're analyzing the patterns and the history of that relationship, and we're like, wow, that can be used as such a manipulative tactic, right? Where often the survivor may not even feel like they're in a, or identify, or they may deny that they're in an abusive relationship, because they're feeling like the harm isn't being put on me. How do you safety plan with that, right? And so sometimes we have to respectfully review those risks and say, hey, I'm concerned about your safety. If this continues, you may find yourself seriously harmed or even dead. So implement the plan, check in, make changes. So like I said, safety plan every time, all the time. Just because you talked to that person yesterday and then maybe they're calling you again, how come they're calling you just one day later? Check in, because maybe you can suggest something a little different. Maybe they're like, no, I was going to try that and this happened. Okay, so now start again. And let's figure out how to get them safe. And again, change plans are not failed plans. And so, often, because I think, like I said, our default setting is to care and to want to help. Sometimes we take it like personal, and you don't want that. You don't want to do that. Because then, we want to make sure we're thinking clearly. We're looking at everything we can do to potentially help get people safe and stay safe. And so, but often, especially with DV survivors, it doesn't go as planned. If you know about statistics that are shared, right? They say that sometimes it takes 7 times, right, to before the cycle of abuse maybe lessens or stops. And so if you think about that, right, I say to you, like, don't give up. Like, if somebody is coming, be there all the time. My office at work is like a revolving door, because I have advocates coming in saying, I'm frustrated, we did this and this didn't work, or I was supposed to meet them at the courthouse to file for a petition for TRO or divorce, and then they didn't show up or whatever. And I think that, when you plant the seed that you are there to provide information and support, no matter what they do or say, you could change a life. Really, I really, I believe that to my core, because then and when they're ready, they're going to remember that you or they were met by you with no judgment, and you were willing and ready to start again to provide them information and support. And so, often I have to always remind, I'm probably a few times a week, I'm having to kind of give advocates kind of pep talks and send this a reminder to them that change plans are not failed plans. Holy moly, there's only 12 minutes left. It works best as a partnership. So again, they are the experts of their own life, right? So you have information, expertise, knowledge, and resources, but it's not about you. It's not about me. It's really about them, and remembering, what works for them. I said this so many times already. Survivors are the experts of their own lives. So you want to build a partnership, review risks, and identify options relevant to her priorities, decisions, and the dangers she faces. Um, Survivor centered, survivor defined. I think in our lines of work, again, we hear this all the time, right? But then occasionally I'll get asked, "What is that?" And so really, that begins with understanding each survivor's perspective. And again, when you're thinking about working with people from other cultures, you really want to take time and ask questions, ask or have them identify meaning, to what they're sharing, because what we might be interpreting and then something we suggest might be totally like off the wall, because maybe that's not what that person meant or how they understand something. And so survivor centered, survivor defined also is about learning about the survivor's risk analysis, life circumstances. And this again, if you might have noticed, I'm repeating these things because these are practical things that we can just remember, right? It's actually not very complex. If we're thinking, okay, we're gonna each survivor comes with their own life, their own understanding, their own wants and needs. Okay, what are we gonna do? We're gonna review the risks, analyze that, what is happening in their life, and then what is their priority. um, and then we want to consider their past and or current safety plans. Those can be so helpful when when we're trying to provide them options, because if we know that they've tried this, with this partner or whatever, and that didn't work, then that's something we don't have to waste time on. And then, understand their relationship decisions. And the reason I say that is because I told you when I started this that so many people don't want to leave their relationship. They just want the abuse to stop. And so every safety plan and client are unique. I've kind of been, sprinkling this information throughout our time together today, that these are other things that we want to consider when we're building a safety plan or discussing safety tips, about maybe, someone, has concerns about accessing courts. What if their abuser is works in a court? What if their abuser is law enforcement, or knows people in law enforcement? What if, them leaving, maybe they want, they're wanting to, you want them to create a safety plan for leaving, but, um, they are military, and, they're not from here, or whatever it is. These are just some of the things that you might face, or that we face in our work, and we have to consider. These are the considerations: accessing courts, child support, violence in the home, military. What if they're teens? We have our Teen Alert program, or it's better known as TAP 808, where we provide advocacy to youth that are 12 to 21 years old. We've had clients who are 12. The two youngest clients we have right now who are experiencing abusive dating, relationships, are 15. And I mean, that's such a that's for another day. It just works me up when I think about, about us doing what we can to be more to provide more prevention or awareness or education and support. Anyways, disabled. I can go off on a tangent if you cannot tell. It just means a lot. I just want people to be able to know that there are people that can help. Um, what about if they're disabled or elderly? If they have children, of course, that makes things complex. um, let's see, if they're undocumented, we have undocumented clients, and then what happens then, right? Or if the abuse is happening over technology, or if they live in a rural area, or if they're part of different communities, right? when you think about um, when you think about some of the services, and I said that, domestic violence doesn't discriminate, and at DVAC we provide services to anyone who we assess to be a victim of intimate partner violence. However, there's not many. When I think about like the resources available, there's not many like male specific, services for something like this, right? Um or specific like services for LGBTQ community, where these are all things that are unique, and they face unique barriers and challenges. And so we want to these are again just considerations to think about. Understand the survivor's perspective. Who is the other person, right? There, you're going to identify the abusive partner's use and level of force from what they tell you. And so, because that would determine how what kind of suggestions that we might offer to them. And so, these are just some of the things that we think about, or we ask about when, before we're safety planning with a client. And so, is the abuser using coercion, threats? What kind of physical violence has the abusive partner used? Does the abusive partner threaten to use weapons? Has the abusive partner used weapons? So these are just some of the things to consider, to ask if you are having to safety plan with someone. And you want to analyze the risk. Has your partner become increasingly more violent? So we use a lethality assessment, and we ask some of these questions, right? um, Ask follow-up questions. Can you describe the incident? How often does this happen? And then assign meaning. What do you think that change in behavior means? We cannot speculate or assume. Again, they are the expert of their own lives. If they're telling you that this little thing, it may not even seem like anything to us when we're hearing it. It might mean a big thing. I have sat in court with clients, and all the all the abuser at the other table did, they're like, we're in between them, and all he did was go like this, and she didn't want to talk, she didn't want to move forward, she didn't want to, she, even though she felt like she was ready, we get into court, and now she doesn't want to say anything. Later on, I asked, I'm trying to understand what happened, what changed, she said that she knew that that sound meant, I'm gonna get you. Right? Of course, I wouldn't. For me, I wouldn't have known that. But for her, she knew that I can't go through this. And so we want to make sure that when that they are assigning meaning to behaviors, their partner's behaviors, so that way maybe we can get a better picture. And these are, let me see the time. Woo! These are some. Oh, yeah, yeah. I wish that I could be with you guys for like 4 hours. These are some tips if violence is unavoidable. Um, again, some people don't want to leave. But if violence is unavoidable, these are some of the tips that we share when we're creating a safety plan, right? Is we suggest that maybe they dive into a corner and curl up into a ball, and to protect their face and head, right? And the reason we tell them to go into a corner is because there's many times clients let us know that they get hit so hard or so much that they black out. And we don't, if they're in a corner, the likelihood of them, just falling there instead of maybe falling forward, hitting their head on maybe something else and sustaining further injuries. We think about that. And so this is one of the things that we suggest when we're doing a safety plan with people where violence is unavoidable. We tell them to make themselves a small target, avoid wearing scarves or long jewelry because these can be used to strangle someone. Identify areas in the home where there are no weapons. Again, try to stay away from the kitchen, the garage. Identify areas in the home where it can be easier to escape. So if they're ready to go, maybe get towards a window or a door, whatever it is, if they need to escape. And then avoid running where the children are. Sometimes maybe our instinct as parents might be like, look, this person is being this way, I'm gonna go and get my children to protect them, but actually sometimes we could be bringing the harm to them. And I know that I'm kind of I'm going through this quickly for the sake of time. This is not, I'm not trying to make light of it. But this is, again, so many people don't want to leave their home or their partner. And these are the things that we go over with them to try to lessen the likelihood of them, being harmed seriously. Here's some other tips, and I will share this with Alex, so that way she can send it out so you guys can look through them if you want. Here are more tips. Create several plausible reasons for leaving the house at different times. Make a habit of backing the car into the driveway and keeping it fueled in case they have to leave. They can get in there and go instead of having to think about reversing. Just it's just a quick escape. Keep weapons like guns, knives locked away and as inaccessible as possible. So if someone was reporting that maybe their partner does use or threaten them with weapons, well, where's the ammo? Like, maybe they can start hiding the ammunition if possible. Let trusted friends and neighbors know of the situation and develop a plan and visual signal for when help is needed. That one, a lot of people don't want to do, but that's a tip. If they're planning to leave, here are some examples of what we suggest to them is keep proof of the abuse, especially if they're going to want to report it to law enforcement or go through the court system. Know where they can get help. Now, if you didn't know that DVAC existed, where we can offer a lot of help. Find work or access to financial resources, set aside money, think about keeping getting their important documents, and then keep important phone numbers somewhere. So like I said, after a survivor has left an abusive relationship, the risk of harm does not go away. In fact, they might be at greater risk. So these are just some tips that we use or that we share with survivors after they've left an abusive relationship. Change your phone number, alter your work hours or the route to work, shop at different places. And again, right from the beginning, I said, oh, this might be obvious, but these are some of these things So often when they're in crisis, they're not thinking about stuff like this. So these are just some of the things that we want, that we share. And let me see. I really want, oops, sorry, I'm at time. I want to think about mental health, right? Or think about mental health, please, when we're safety planning. I think that, not to minimize, but bruises and cuts, they may heal, but the lasting impacts of the harm that is done to people's mental health when they're experiencing this can be much longer lasting if there's no support or there's no assistance for that. So we want to take into consideration someone's mental health safety planning, and these are some of the ways we can do that. And to think about pets. 71% of survivors report their abusers threaten or harmed a pet, and these are actually one of the common reason why people stay is because of their pets. I did have a scenario. I'm going to share this in the chat and invite you to we don't have invite you to please look it over and maybe practice and send it back to me so that way we can discuss it more. And it's a simple jot form, and I tell you about Pua, who who's a client and not a real client, I made her up, but it helps us to think of the things that we need to think about when we're safety planning or when we're wanting to safety plan. So I just dropped it in the chat. I'm going to put my contact information up so that way if you did want to send it back and you do want to talk about this in more detail, you can get a hold of me. So let me give you, actually, I'm just going to put my contact information in the chat. And please reach out to me. I hope that you guys, these are things to consider when you're, so I'm give you a scenario and I give you questions to think about with safety planning. So that is my email. And you can also reach me at my office. Just ask for me and I will be more than happy to go over this with you. Hopefully the little worksheet um is helpful. Let me know if it is, if it's not. Um and then I will look through the questions, any questions that were put in the chat, and then I will reach out to you if you had a question for me. So, and then I can also, yes, I can send guiding. I saw someone asking about templates and guiding questions. I'll definitely send that over. So, but anyways, thank you for spending your lunch with me. I wish we had more time. And if you wanted, a more comprehensive, presentation or training, please, please, please reach out to me. I love being able to share this information with you. So thank you for spending your lunch with me. I hope you guys got to eat while you're listening to me. All right, everybody, take care. I'll go through the chat. And like I said, I might not be able to get to it today, but I'll try to get to it by the end of the week.
Thank you so much, Ella. We appreciate you.
Thank you. All righty, take care.
Take care.
Bye.